Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Friedman, the 113th president of the National Press Club, journalist in residence at University of Maryland Global Campus, and executive producer of the public broadcasting series, The Calb Report. Today's speaker, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Robert Wilkie, has joined us previously for our headliner luncheon commemorating Veterans Day, and we hope he is able to be with us again this coming November. Today, he is here to discuss a new initiative to prevent veteran suicide and organizational changes designed to optimize new technologies and modernize services. We'll be taking questions on cards today. Lindsay Underwood. Lindsay, are you there? Great. Lindsay will be collecting the cards. Since this is an event for working press, we would like to leave the questions to our journalists in the audience. I ask you to please print legibly, and if you wish, you can put your name and your news organization on the card. That's up to you. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Secretary Wilkie, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm going to start off with something. I really am glad to be at the Press Club today for many reasons. First of all, for veterans. The Press Club has a unique place in the annals of American service. The American Legion Post that was established here right after World War I and continues to this day had amongst its members General of the Armies, Jack Pershing. And that is a testament to the bravery, the frontline service of American journalists throughout the years. I was privileged just a few minutes ago by your president to receive the collected works of Edward R. Murrow and the autobiography of Walter Cronkite, men who had served as much time on the front line as many of those who were commissioned or enlisted in the fight against both Germany and Japan. The other thing I will say is that last night, the president opened with a very optimistic theme about America's comeback. For those of us who have served, for those of us who serve veterans to this day, I think the hallmark of yesterday evening was the presence of General Charles Magee. I had the great privilege of hosting General Magee when he was a colonel a few months ago, and he is a testament to the valor and the stick-to-itiveness of the American nation, having served in combat in 3 great wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And as an airman who has never had wings, I stand in awe of his accomplishments. Before I tell you that the state of our VA is very strong and is in a position that we have not been in many years, I will speak to you about the events that occurred on Monday. As many of you have covered, we left out, or had to part, the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs. It is a simple business decision. There are times in any company, and in the military, and even in Congress, when there are some people in the organization who just don't gel with the rest of the team. IBN just let go its CEO of many years. The chairman of the House Veterans Committee, Mr. Takano, just relieved a senior member of his staff, which he felt was in the best interest of his organization and veterans. There's nothing personal, but we have so many things going on. It has been my mission, my goal, to ensure that everyone who works for us is performing to the utmost. A few years ago, we were accused, when it came to accountability, of only holding those at the lowest end of our workforce to account. I've read many stories that you've written about sterile processing units and custodial workers bearing the burden of changes at VA. I have to tell you that in the time that I've been at VA, if people don't live up to the performance standards that our veterans expect, and some of that may be through no fault of their own, it just may be a bad fit, then I have taken action. We've removed medical network directors. We've removed hospital directors. We've removed custodial staff. And so I wish Jim Byrne well. He was a man of great distinction in terms of his service to the country. But I will say it was a simple business decision. The other thing I will say, and I will categorically emphasize this, that some of the reports that I read that this had to do with a disagreement over the handling of the DC VA and Andrea Goldstein was categorically not true. There was no disagreement there. I think what happened is that this just happened to occur when the story reemerged again. We agreed on the policy from day one, and it had nothing to do with a process that began well over a week ago. So my goal is to make sure that we have an organization that hums along, that is integrated with not only our headquarters, but also with our people in the field. And having learned this business from people with names like Rumsfeld, Gates, and Mattis, we do that from time to time. It is never easy, but I do believe it was in the best interest of the organization and in the best interest of carrying on the reforms that have taken place. Yesterday, I was struck with an incredible statistic. When I became Secretary of VA, I was told that only 25% of women veterans were part of the VA family. Well, last year, on December 31st of 2019, the new statistics came in. And those statistics showed that 41% of all women veterans in this country are now part of VA. We are leading the change in the military culture. When my father was first commissioned, 2 months before President Kennedy was inaugurated, less than 1% of those in uniform were women. As the Undersecretary of Defense under General Mattis, 19% of the force was female. For veterans, that means right now, 10% of all veterans in the United States are America's fighting women. And for us to see those numbers rise so dramatically is an affirmation of how well we have advanced as a culture, how well we are caring for the needs of our women veterans, and we expect that those numbers will increase in the next few years. That also is right in line with the actions that we took when the incident DCVA took place late last year. We immediately referred it to the Justice Department. We took it out of the hands of VA police. And that is part of our commitment to ensure that everyone who walks into a VA is safe and is taken care of, and that when anything happens, we make sure that the highest authorities are informed. And I will also add what I have said to some of you, and it has been in some of your publications. I met with the Inspector General last night. We are working to make sure that the House Veterans Committee and Ms. Goldstein receive all of the information available to make sure that their needs are taken care of. And we have a great concern in that regard. So those issues will play out in the next few days. But I will also say that even though we have had a change in some of the leadership at our VA, not one appointment has been missed, not one operation has been canceled, and our veterans are coming to us in numbers that are unprecedented in our history. So this is the new VA. This is not the VA that existed in 2014. This is not the VA that existed in 2015. We are the nation's largest integrated healthcare system, and that means we still have ongoing challenges that any large organization will face. But we have seen improvement in 3 broad areas. We have redirected ourselves to doing a better job in customer service. That is our single mission, not dodging scandal after scandal and the numbers show our success. Our wait times, according to organizations like the American Medical Association, are good or better than any in the private sector. We are seeing more veterans than ever. We completed 1.7 million more appointments in FY19 than we did in FY18 for a record 59.9 million appointments. 90% of our veterans surveyed trust the care that they get at VA. The Veterans of Foreign Wars' most recent survey showed that 3/4 of the respondents recommend to those veterans who are not part of our organization to join us. As I said earlier, we brought back accountability. More than 8,000 employees have been let go from employment for not meeting the performance standards that our veterans expect. There is no record like that in the federal government. But we have also shown that we can implement dramatic organizational change needed to provide modern services to America's veterans. Mission Act gave veterans real permanent choice. In the first 6 months, we approved nearly 2.8 million referrals to the private sector on behalf of 1.5 million veterans. This year, we will implement a provision of the Mission Act that will extend caregiver benefits to veterans from my father's era, Vietnam, and others who served before 1975. And we are about to launch the electronic health record, which promises to revolutionize the experience veterans have at VA. Now, we are in the middle of a long overdue national conversation about veteran suicide. This is the first time in our history that the President of the United States has focused the energies of his office and the federal government on an issue that has afflicted the armies of the United States for well over a century. The first statistics on veteran suicide were compiled during the administration of Benjamin Harrison in the 1890s. Those numbers have been steady throughout the years. They spiked right before World War II, and they spiked after Vietnam. But as I've said, when I present the results of our Prevents Task Force to the President and to the Congress, if we simply look at the last tragic act in a veteran's life, we will be doing a disservice to the entire country if we do not look at homelessness, addiction, and mental health. To tell you how dramatically our country as a whole has changed, when I was in high school in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the leading cause of death for high school students in America was automobile accidents. Today, the leading cause of death for America's high school students is suicide. I believe that veterans can show the country the way on how to deal with this terrible problem, because most Americans, at whatever level they are, understand what it means when someone puts on a uniform and someone takes that uniform off. In terms of never having a conversation about mental health, we are at VA providing now same-day mental health service. We've launched now universal screenings for all of our veterans to identify any veteran who may be at risk, and more than 4 million veterans have been screened in the last year and a half. Our Veterans Crisis Line takes 1,700 calls a day, and we physically act on 100 of those calls to get immediate help to veterans and their families. But we cannot address this issue alone. 60% of those 20 veterans a day who take their lives have no contact with us. That is why the Prevents Task Force is so important, and I will recommend to the President that we open up the aperture on support for charities, local governments, non-governmental organizations, give them the financial resources that they need to help us find those veterans that we do not see. Now, the third part is that we are living up to our legacy of technological and medical innovation that is befitting America's largest healthcare system. These improvements are not just improvements for veterans, they are improvements for the entire country. It's something that President Nixon predicted when my father's war in Vietnam wound down. And Nixon signed legislation to boost the profile of veterans in our society. He said, By giving our veterans the gratitude and opportunity they deserve, we are not only doing the right thing for them, we are also doing the right thing for all of us. Each returning veteran is a human resource, a mature, highly motivated young citizen who has proven the capacity to serve and to achieve. These young men and women form the strongest hope for America's future. Nixon was correct more than he could ever know. VA had already invented the cardiac pacemaker by then and was the first to perform a liver transplant, development that would benefit the entire nation. In the 1980s, VA invented the nicotine patch. And in the first decade of the new century, we unveiled the first powered ankle-foot prosthetic, ushering in a new era of increased mobility for veterans and other disabled Americans. But our work isn't done. Our innovative staff is already making a difference in people's lives on other fronts. Cancer usually means surgery or administering poison to kill the cancer that severely weakens the patient, or both. With precision oncology, we are now designing treatments that attack the cancer and not the patient. We have already built targeted therapies to attack leukemia. These therapies are already making that cancer less lethal. One researcher called VA's precision oncology program the future of America's cancer care. It means earlier detection, less guesswork about treatment, and more comfortable patients. VA will now have the first 5G hospital in America. President Trump last year challenged America to be the first 5G wireless service, and VA met that challenge. As I speak, our hospital in Palo Alto is about to become the first 5G-enabled health facility in the world, and it should be operational this week. Some might ask, why is 5G important to veterans? What 5G will deliver is richer, more detailed, three-dimensional images of patients' anatomy. The resolution is so clear and consistent that it will give us reliable means of delivering telesurgery services to veterans across the nation. That means we will have the capacity to allow VA's best physicians to consult during surgery, even if they are not in the same room and are halfway across the country. It will also be a breakthrough for surgeons in the operating room. Imagine a doctor being able to see layers beneath the skin before the first incision is ever made. The FDA was never able to approve these sorts of practices in surgery because 4G technology simply could not carry that much information. But we are on the cutting edge and moving forward in ways that just a few years ago were unimaginable. VA's expertise in treating veterans has led to a new branch of research into exoskeletons that change people's lives daily. Traditionally, exoskeletons do the work of moving patients who can't move on their own. But we've launched a pilot to develop exoskeletons that stimulate the spinal cord, and we're seeing promising results. Instead of the exoskeleton moving the patient around, the patient can increasingly control the exoskeleton as their own muscles are reactivated. With further research at VA, we are hoping to turn the exoskeleton from a mobility device into something that trains injured people to walk again under their own power. Now, virtual reality isn't a technology that VA developed, but we've partnered with the University of Southern California, a nonprofit called Soldier Strong, and applied VR to help veterans with PTSD and pain management. Veterans with PTSD are often unable to process the emotions related to a traumatic experience in the field. Virtual reality allows them to relive, reimagine those traumatic events in a controlled setting under the care of clinicians. We found that giving veterans a chance to process those emotions can be an effective treatment for PTSD. Virtual reality can also help block pain signals from reaching the brain, and thus is a drug-free supplement to traditional brain therapies. Telehealth. Telehealth is a tool VA is already using to consult with rural patients. And rural Americans to this day provide more soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines than any other part of the country. We've partnered with Walmart to reach veterans this way even when they don't live anywhere near a VA clinic. But telehealth is also being used to diagnose patients remotely. Many veterans develop diabetes, for example, which makes it harder for the body to deliver blood to the extremities, and that can lead to foot ulcers. And these ulcers develop, they cause temperature variations in the foot. Today, VA can monitor those temperature variations by using floor mats embedded with thermographic sensors that veterans can use at home. VA doctors can detect these variations remotely with a telehealth connection. These foot ulcers cost VA $3.2 billion a year. Now we can get ahead of this problem by detecting them earlier and directing treatment. So that is the state of President Trump's VA. We are once again fulfilling the sacred promise to aid Americans' veterans. When Washington delivered his farewell orders to the Continental Army in 1783, he said it was now America's duty to welcome those soldiers back to civilian life. As he put it, and shall not the brave men who have contributed so essentially to these inestimable acquisitions, retiring victorious from the field of war to the field of agriculture, participate in all the blessings which have been obtained? In such a republic, who will exclude them from the rights of citizens and the fruits of their labors? I'm proud to be part of this historic effort to right the VA ship and to serve veterans. I will finish with a story that was particularly important to my father, a veteran of the 82nd Airborne Division. The greatest of all airborne warriors was Matthew Bunker Ridgway, who led the All-American Division to victory in Sicily, North Africa, and planned the Allied airborne assault on Hitler's fortress Europe. The night before the invasion, he actually fell out of his cot, and he reached for the Old Testament, and he pulled down the book of Joshua and looked to Joshua's promise from the Almighty that I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. In 1986, President Reagan awarded General Ridgway the Presidential Medal of Freedom, where he said that heroes come when they are needed. Great Americans step forward when courage seems in short supply. That is our duty at VA, to serve those great Americans who step forward when their country needed them and step forward when courage seems in short supply. So I thank you very much for being here. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Wilkie. Some of the questions that have been submitted may overlap some points that you've touched on, and others will find new ground. Mr. Secretary, could you please clarify the reasons for dismissing Deputy Secretary Burns and how the VA plans to guarantee stability in this position and VA reforms moving forward?
Well, I will stand by what I said, that it was just a question of not gelling with other members of the team, something that happens in business, in the military, in every day. In terms of succession, we'll present names to the White House for consideration. But let me talk about some of the most important projects that are ongoing. Certainly the biggest project for us is the electronic health record. The Deputy Secretary has duties in that regard, but the electronic health record on a day-to-day basis is managed by Captain John Wyndham, retired United States Navy. I knew him at the Pentagon. He was one of the Navy's top talents. In terms of oversight, our Assistant Secretary for Enterprise Integration, Melissa Glenn, who was probably one of the great organizational geniuses in the government of the United States and one of Price Waterhouse's youngest partners, is responsible for that oversight. I expect us to be able to launch this. But things go on. As I mentioned, we are like any other government agency. People come and go, and the mission goes on. And I'm very proud to say that VA is in a very different place from what it was just a few years ago. Our veterans are satisfied in numbers that we have never seen, and they're voting with their feet.
And how do you think, if at all Deputy Secretary Burns' departure might impact EHR learner migration?
Oh, I don't think it impacted at all. I mentioned the two leaders who are responsible for the bulk of the transformation. I sat down with the Secretary of Defense about a week ago and discussed where we are, because this is a joint partnership with the Department of Defense. We are doing well. And I think Mission Act shows that this VA is capable of pulling off enormously complex programs. I expect us to do well in this venture, as we did with Mission. I think we astonished many people in this town by pulling off Mission. We've seen the fruits of it in terms of our customer satisfaction, and I expect us to do the same with electronic health.
How concerned are you about veterans being overprescribed prescription drugs at VA clinics? Do you think that overprescription is directly linked to veteran suicide rates?
Well, I'm not a medical professional, but I appreciate that question greatly. So VA is not immune to the trends in American medicine. And for many years, certainly before I came to VA, the trend in American medicine was to overprescribe painkillers. VA recognized that crisis, I think, long before the rest of America did. We have reduced opioid prescription at VA by 51% in the last few years. We have led the nation in terms of substituting opioids with common household painkillers like aspirin and ibuprofen, aspirin and acetaminophen. But the other thing that we are doing, and I mentioned changing the culture to be more welcoming for America's women veterans. The other thing we are doing is we are changing the culture of the military mind itself. Give you an example in terms of treating pain. My father, terribly wounded in the invasion of Cambodia. If I had come to him and said, you know, Major, he was a major when he was wounded in Cambodia, we're going to get to the source of that combat pain through yoga and music therapy and water therapy, my nose would have been flat against my face. It was contrary to the ethos of the warrior. But what I have seen by us educating and walking veterans through means to address pain and not the brain, I have seen Vietnam veterans, 78-year-old veterans, doing aquatherapy, music therapy, art therapy. It's a combination. It is a whole health approach that I believe VA has set the standard for in the rest of the country. We continue to make sure that the only pain medicine that is prescribed is absolutely necessary, and it is the last act that we perform after already exhausting many avenues for pain management.
We'll stay on that subject. Another question. Is volume drug buying working to reduce prices for veterans, and are there any glitches if that becomes a broader model?
You know, I haven't seen any. We have an incredible relationship with America's pharmaceutical companies, but then we come to them with 9.5 million patients. We have a model that works. It works for veterans. It works for the taxpayer. I'm not a healthcare system expert in terms of the economics of healthcare, but it certainly is working for us.
The VA is currently investigating the suspicious deaths of at least 10 veterans who appear to have been administered insulin they did not need. Can you share generally what lapses at VA may have led to those deaths, and what can be done to prevent future tragedies?
Well, I try not to look at tragedies antiseptically. There are names here. There are names of families, names like Holloway and Ash and McDermott, who need answers. This investigation began before I was secretary. Lisa Rain has reported on it extensively in the Washington Post. And We certainly, we don't know all of the answers. Her reporting indicated that a grand jury has convened. I will reserve judgment on that on a final comment until the grand jury and the U.S. attorney issue their final report. But in spite of that, we are constantly looking at ways to improve health and safety. I would also point out that we are not immune to things, and I'm not saying that things happen on this scale, but we're not immune to the problems that exist in general society. But we have conducted comprehensive safety reviews of that facility and the rest of our facilities. I will also say that the Clarksburg facility now has, since these things were reported, it has one of the highest patient satisfaction rates in VA. We have taken an incredible amount of time there. I want these families to have an answer, and I hope it comes soon.
Question regarding technological developments.
Yeah.
How far away is 5G-enabled telesurgery from being used? Has it been tested or attempted? And what is the status of exoskeleton development and use?
Well, I mentioned before, this week, Palo Alto, which is attached to the great medical school at Stanford, will be coming online as the first American 5G hospital. We have been testing with the university those surgeries. I mentioned earlier that the equipment, the facilities that we have in Palo Alto can now look at a patient and look below the incision line to guide a surgeon in ways that have never been possible. On exoskeletons, we have changed the focus of the technology. The technology has always been to focus on the actual muscles. We've changed the focus to stimulating the spinal cord. That is the key to the future of injury recovery, is trying to finally figure out how we can recreate motion through that most elemental of nervous system foundations. And I think we're making good progress. We are testing out exoskeletons with that spinal cord focus. We're working with the Department of Defense. If you go down to our hospital in Tampa, they are joined at the hip with Special Operations Command at MacDill. Many of those special warriors who are injured in combat in areas like this are patients, recovery patients at our hospital in Tampa. So a lot of great progress there.
What are your plans to address toxic exposure this year? What do you have to say to K2 veterans
Sure.
Now struck with cancer?
Sure. For those of you who don't know, K2 refers to an air base in Uzbekistan. Several years ago, and McClatchy has reported on this extensively. Several years ago, our soldiers, sailors, and airmen particularly, started seeing black goo come up from the ground. We're working with the Department of Defense to get to the bottom of that. What is happening out there? What I am telling veterans, and I said this to the Secretary of Defense last week, I want all veterans who've been there and who feel they need to see us to come forward. We are continuing to investigate with DOD, but the message that I have for all of our veterans, be it those who have been exposed to something at K2, be it Blue Water Navy veterans, be it those who still suffer the impacts of Agent Orange, come see us. File the claims. Come speak to us. This is not your grandfather's VA where the paperwork's going to last 10 years. We're computerizing. We're coming to the cloud. We have people ready to help. And that's the message that I give to K2. We are, as I said, aggressively working with DOD to get to the bottom of it, but in the meantime, we want people to come to us if they've been there.
On veteran suicide,
Yeah.
you mentioned reaching homeless veterans and those without ties to the VA. How specifically can you reach these unreachable veterans?
Well, we know the model works, and it worked on homelessness. There were hundreds of thousands of homeless veterans just a few years ago. Today, we're right below 40,000. And how has that worked? Major cities in this country, Houston, Atlanta, New Orleans, have eliminated veterans homelessness. The way they eliminated veterans homelessness, charities, I'll give you New Orleans as an example. Catholic charities came to VA and said, let us help you go where you don't go. Go into the streets of the city, and we'll start talking to those on the streets. If they're veterans, come with us, we'll bring them to you. In addition to that, and again, New Orleans as the example, there have been communities that have been built around the city where they house homeless veterans and their families, and they transition them to the workforce. We know it works in that sense. We need to have it work for suicide. I'll give you an example. State of Alaska, a unique example. Many people, many Americans of all stripes, veterans, non-veterans, will go to Alaska to separate themselves from society for whatever reason. 50% of the veterans in Alaska have no contact with us. They have no contact with any government. I went to the Alaska Federation of Natives and asked them to double the number of tribal representatives that they have dealing in veterans issues to help us get out into the wilderness of Alaska to find those veterans. The other thing about veteran suicide that ties into this, most of the veterans who take their lives, as I mentioned, we don't see, but most of those are from Vietnam, my father's generation. And let me put that in perspective. Lyndon Johnson left Washington, D.C. 51 years ago, 2 weeks ago. I remember the impact of that conflict, even on someone like my father who served in Vietnam and came back, recovered, and went back to active duty. As a senior officer in the 82nd Airborne Division, most decorated combat unit in the armed forces of the United States, he could not wear his uniform off post. That's southeastern North Carolina. That's not Cambridge. That's not Berkeley. People still feel the effects of that conflict, the psychological impact of not being welcome home. And I think we still see the tragedy of that conflict. It continues to unfold. So we have to come up with more creative mechanisms to deal with this. And as I said, it has been an issue that we know of for well over 100 years. And because it is tied to mental health, America has never come to grips with talking about mental health. It is the last frontier in medicine. And I've said before, even though I'm not a medical professional, I do know soldiers, that we are not even at the Sputnik stage when it comes to that issue. And I hope that through our efforts on suicide, on homelessness, on mental health, that we can help the rest of the country as well as veterans.
We've had several questions on this topic. Consolidating them here, are you satisfied with the resolution in the Andrea Goldstein case, and are there long-term implications for the VA?
Well, let me go back to the statistics that I gave you, and I'll start there first. 780,000 women veterans are using VA. 41%. Now, 48% of American male veterans use VA, so we're getting close to parity now. That was unheard of 2 years ago. That means, as I said, women veterans are now voting with their feet. I'm not satisfied with the resolution of the Goldstein case, and I said so to the chairman of the House Veterans Committee just yesterday. I have to know, Ms. Goldstein has to know, our women veterans have to know if the facilities are safe. And that is why I met with the IG yesterday. We're going to make a renewed push to get answers not to divulge any confidential information, but to help us help ourselves and help women veterans to make sure that they feel safe and welcomed. I will also say that I've seen the change. I've seen the change in the military culture in my lifetime. I do think that there are still residues within the military world that have not fully accepted those changes. But I am pressing for the final answers on that, not to divulge to you all, but to make sure that those involved get satisfaction because they deserve it.
Mr. Secretary, what are you doing about deported veterans?
Well, that is an issue that goes beyond my purview. Even though people may be veterans, there are other laws that govern American life. I will tell you what I am doing, though, to increase our reach into communities that have been underserved. I have spent a great deal of time focusing on Native American and Pacific Island veterans. I'm the first VA secretary to ever testify in front of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. I have visited all of our territories in the Pacific, as well as those freely associated compact state countries like Micronesia, Palau, the Marshall Islands, who send their citizens to the armed forces of the United States, trying to get services out to those who serve us. And we follow the law on that first front. But I'm not prescient or arrogant enough to say that I'm going to leave a legacy. But my focus has been on underserved communities. And when I mention Native Americans, highest per capita rate of service of any group in the country. Highest award of the two highest medals for valor. The Medal of Honor and then the Distinguished Service Cross, the Air Force Cross and the Navy Cross. I've been meeting with tribal nation leaders all from Alaska all the way down to Oklahoma, and we'll continue that thrust.
Where do your efforts stand to have employee unions vacate VA office space or pay rent? I believe the deadline was at the end of January.
I followed the executive orders. We expect people to pay their fair share. Give you an example. One of our largest hospitals, the space for the union president was over 7,000 square feet. I will let you pass judgment on the proportionality of that, but I need that space for mental health services. I need that space for smoking cessation purposes. We have given the unions the opportunity to pay rent. I can't be chastised on one hand for not spending enough money or not having enough financial resources to serve veterans, and entire swaths of our facilities go to folks who aren't paying rent. That's just the bottom line.
Can you speak to the authorities and financial resources, if you can offer a dollar amount, that you have given to mature AI and regarding suicide prevention?
I can't. But let me tell you what we have done. No, I can't give you specifics. And if you want to tell me who wrote that question or give it to the folks, I will get an answer for that. Okay. But let me tell you how we have changed our approach. And I'll go back because I've been accused of being Forrest Gump and relating everything back to the Roman Empire. I won't go to the Roman Empire, but let's go back to my childhood. In my childhood, if an American soldier received an other than honorable discharge, that soldier was completely cut off from the federal government, and completely cut off from VA. It's a Neanderthal world. We don't do that anymore. We are moving forward in the way we assess how warriors are wounded and how they are treated. If you have an other than honorable discharge, we will take care of you. If there is a mental health issue, if there is a chance that that soldier will take his life. Our mental health budget last year was $9.5 billion. That's 10% of our entire health budget. I expect when the president presents his budget on February 10th that those numbers will go up. I want them to go up because, as I said, we haven't even scratched the surface of that issue.
Secretary Wilkie, Austin Tice is a journalist and combat Marine veteran who has been held in Syria since 2012. Can you, as the leader of the VA, ask for an interagency briefing on his case?
I would be happy. I actually mentioned Austin Tice in November. I know his trials in Syria, and from VA's perspective, we have let it be known that he is one of those frontline warriors that we need to account for his own safety and for the well-being of the family. So I agree with that.
Thank you. I'm going to come back up and join you at the
Sure.
podium. Thank you for
getting a
joining us
collection.
today. And yes, as a token of our appreciation and to add to your collection, we would like to present you with our National Press Club coffee mug.
Thank you.
And we thank you very much for
Thank
joining
you.
us
No,
today.
it's a great honor. Thank you all. I am not saying this to be obsequious, but you have heard me say it, and I mentioned it to you. My great goal in life was to pretend to be someone like Ed Murrow or Richard C. Hotlett. I had a dog-eared copy of Dan Rather's The Camera Never Blinks on my easel at the high school newspaper office. I will say what I have said. Journalists on the front lines, the front line of freedom, I mean that. Even in this climate, I mean it sincerely. I've seen it my entire life. I can tell you what my father thought of those journalists who were next to him in Cambodia during the darkest and most difficult days of that invasion. Some of those reporters he never saw again. So that's why I never hesitate to come here and to give you as honest assessment as I can of what is happening with America's veterans and what is happening with the second largest of our government organizations. So that's why it's always an honor for me to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.